And it's absolutely my pleasure to introduce our next presenter and summit host, Dr. Tim Waters from McREL. Dr. Waters has been our president and chief executive officer since 1995. Prior to working for McREL, he spent 23 years working in K-12 education in Arizona, in Colorado, as a teacher, assistant principal, high school principal, assistant superintendent, and superintendent. In each of his professional roles, Tim has been acknowledged as an innovator and reformer. As a superintendent, he led a 7-year standards-based initiative that produced gains in student achievement and narrowed gaps between high and low achievers. Under his leadership, McREL has been recognized as a leading education research, development, and service organization. Dr. Waters is the author of numerous articles on education leadership and co-author of School Leadership That Works, From Research to Results, and District Leadership That Works, Striking the Right Balance, which was the work that actually started us down this path of looking at high reliability educational systems. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Tim Waters.
Music down, sound up. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tolliver. I think what I'm going to probably do here is find myself setting myself up to be picked off by both of our first keynoters. Here's what we do with the kind of great thinking that we've already heard today and the kind of data sets that we've seen and some of our own research. We try to make sense out of that stuff as an applied R&D organization, to try to bring together what are those ideas that have the greatest, not just the greatest currency, but what might hunt and what hunts together to make the biggest difference in the work that you're doing in your organizations, school districts, or other organizations right now. So, Tolliver, will you bring up my first slide? Thank you. So as knowing, having read their work and having heard them speak, and knowing that we would hear not necessarily divergent, but challenging points of view, and sometimes where there are some edges that we need to be thinking about. For me, it's like, how would I think about coming behind that to try to set the stage, maybe for the rest of the program and for how we've been thinking about their work and the work of others in service to what we do in the field. So for me, I tried to frame this around the idea of necessary, sufficient in the future. And the image that's on the screen right now is the backdrop is what we've used for our network for innovative education. So over the rest of the afternoon and tomorrow, you're going to have a chance to hear from some of the school districts that are part of that network. And we'll talk a little bit more about the power of networks and the value of networks tomorrow with some of our partners. So now my remote is not working, Tolliver, so you're going to have me through these slides. How many of you you're familiar with Mike Mandelbaum's book or Tom Friedman and Mike Mandelbaum's book, That Used to Be Us? There's one of the chapters. There's a paragraph. There we go, where they set up kind of this challenge, where they've done the description of what Jeff Canada and his team have done in the Harlem Children's Zone and what extraordinary a deployment of resources and the kind of impact they're having in the Harlem Children's Zone. And the point that they make is all that work is to ensure that the schools in Harlem are as good as the schools in Scarsdale, which is an obligation that we have to children everywhere. They go on to make the point that is necessary and insufficient. What's necessary and sufficient is schools in Harlem and Scarsdale are as good as the best schools in the world. Now, if you're familiar with their work, the actual quote is, are as good as the schools in Shanghai, right? I paraphrased it because I knew that Dr. Zhao was going to touch on Shanghai. So the point here is what we need to do as an organization, I know what you're working to do in your systems, is to ensure that schools, wherever they are, whether it's in the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, or in the Cree Nation, or in Jefferson County, Colorado, or Gwinnett County, Georgia, is to ensure that schools everywhere here are as good as the best schools in the world. And here's how we've come at that as an organization. For 47 years, we've been in the business of trying to do the necessary, try to identify what works and bring together what works in ways that will make a difference in practice. And you've seen some of the work that we've done over the years displayed out front. We think pretty good stuff, answering questions about what works, and we think more recently about what matters. So there's no shortage of data on effect sizes, right? Dr. Hanushek talked earlier about the power of great teaching, right? And the data are pretty clear. If you look at effect sizes, there's no question that having a great teacher in every classroom is going to get you the biggest yield, right, for whatever that investment is. But we've also done some of our own work on the effects of school and district level leadership. And we know that the effect sizes, and we've computed, done our own computations of how much of the variance that we see in achievement can you attribute to, what leaders do and what teachers do. So we also know that it's hard to, at least it's hard for us to imagine that if we want to ensure high quality instruction for every child, every day, in every classroom, which would be one standard or measure of reliability, assuming we can put quality with consistency all the time, to do that in school-wide and then to do that district-wide is going to require leadership. So for us, there we go. For us, it's not only about great teachers and great teaching, although that's where it starts. It's also about great leadership and what we do around schools and around leaders and around teachers at the district level. In fact, this last study that we did, the study on district level leadership, for us, we started down a path trying to answer a question, is there any relationship between what happens outside of a school and what happens inside of a classroom? And we didn't know what we would find, but we did surprisingly and joyfully find that there is some relationship between what happens at the system level and what happens in a school and at a classroom level. And because of that, we started to pursue a line of inquiry that starts with Carl Weick. Now, you might say, where did he come from and why Carl Weick in this conversation? Because in 1976, Carl Weick, in a paper, wrote that schools, and I could go into the details here, that schools are among the most unreliable or low reliability systems in the country, that there was no evidence of a relationship between what happens outside of a classroom or at the highest levels of the system and the core technology of the system, which is instruction. So when we got to our findings on our district study, we looked at one another, Bob Marzano and I, who did the study, and said, let's go back and check what Carl Weick said back in 1976, because we think we've arrived at a conclusion that conflicts a bit with what he asserted then. And what we found is the work he's done since then has really focused on systems, not in education, although education now is part of that work, systems that deliver every time, high quality actually, every time, every day for everyone. They write about this as high reliability organizing and high reliability organizations. And the reason it's important to us is that we looked at his findings and found interesting parallels between what happens in systems that get it right every day, every time for everyone, and some of our own work, right? The work that we've done over the last 47 years. And we thought, if we can integrate principles of high reliability organizing along with our findings and the work of some others, maybe it'll be a kind of a quantum step forward in improving quality with reliability every time, every day for every student. Now, we found that there are other people, scholars, trying to answer that question as well, and you're going to hear tomorrow, I'll do a little bit of a warm-up act for Tom Bellamy. We're going to unpack principles of high reliability organizing tomorrow. You'll hear from probably the leading scholar in education on this tomorrow, and what the implications are for your work and for ours. But because of their work, because of Carl Weick's work and the work he and his colleagues are doing at the University of Michigan and in Berkeley and other institutions and outside of education, we concluded, you're going to have to help me, Tolliver. We concluded, we were influenced that The unit of change on which we would continue to focus for our work would be the school district for a variety of reasons. Number one, the findings suggest we can make a difference from that level. Number two, the thought of trying to do scalable, sustainable, transformative work, both improvement work and transformative work, focused on individual teachers or individual classrooms, was simply not going to be the best use of our contribution to this work. So the focus on school districts as unit of change come from our work and from work on high reliability organizing. Thanks. So we took our work and integrated this work from Carl Weick and his colleagues on high reliability organizing and developed a framework that we talk about as the What Matters Most framework. The only reason it's here is that we think it's a pretty good organizer, and I'm going to connect this to some other work in just a minute. We think it's a pretty good organizer for being really explicit about number one, what works, number two, what matters, to do the necessary, and that is to ensure that schools in Harlem are as good as the schools in Scarsdale. And if you were to dig into or unpack this framework, not only do we address the importance of the quality of teaching, we are, as opposed to, let me just say it this way, we think there's value in the Common Core or in a standards-based approach, but not as a one-size-fits-all approach. That we are, and we've seen examples of it, convinced that it's possible to have standards and multiple pathways to success. That we're absolutely convinced, based on our work and the work of others, that if we do the right work with young children in the areas of self-regulation and the development of executive function, the idea of creativity, along with the disciplines of goal setting and problem solving and persistence, are developed very early in young children, even prior to their coming into the K-12 system, part of school readiness. Our data are really clear on the importance of school cultures, high-performing school cultures, and the effects of school-level leadership. And then to top that off, what we've learned about the work that happens outside schools at the system level. So an organizing framework. So keep that framework in mind, because about the time we fleshed out that framework, the McKinsey group reports on their work on the most rapidly improving systems in the world, right? So their 2010 study, how the world's most rapidly improving schools continue to improve, lays out really these four conclusions. That rapid system improvement is possible. That was consistent with our findings and consistent with the work of high reliability organizing. Number one. Number two, what matters is pretty consistent across context. How it's implemented and when it's implemented becomes very contextually specific. That at times, prescribing adequacy is necessary, but insufficient. We can prescribe adequacy, we have to unleash greatness. Here's the point. What they found is in low-performing systems where students are not served well, to not come together on a consistent approach to high-quality delivery of the program is the part of the problem. That we better get the basics right and prescribe what is adequate for kids in low-performing systems. And as those systems begin to improve, unleash greatness to take them to higher and higher levels of performance. And at the end of the day, none of that happens without great leadership. So if we take those conclusions and we think about the McKinsey study laying out a trajectory of performance, the McKinsey folks concluded that with low-performing systems, there really does need to be bundled interventions, and they do a nice job of laying out what those bundled interventions are. That for systems that are trending towards good and great, those are really opportunities to continue to improve. And for systems to go from great to excellent, and then what comes after that really is going to require approaches to innovation. So for us, we think the idea of an organizing framework to help move systems along a continuum of improvement from poor to fair, fair to good, good towards great. That framework is a pretty good organizer, and it's absolutely necessary, but insufficient. So for us to get to the necessary and sufficient, we thought, well, where would we find in otherwise low reliability, or in a business with similar reliability issues in healthcare, where would we go to find efforts to improve both quality and reliability that could be adapted to the work we're doing in education? So we looked at the work that's going on with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and you will hear a lot tomorrow, Jim, I think on the program tomorrow, you'll hear a lot tomorrow on the IHI short cycle R&D driven approach to innovation. So we've spent some time thinking about what does that look like applied in education. And we've come up with our own adaptation of a short cycle R&D driven approach to innovation that creates prototypes to be tested, work that is going on in school districts that are part of our network that you'll hear from this afternoon and tomorrow. So at the end of the day, for us, if we think about adding R&D driven innovation to improvement efforts, to move from good to great and from great to excellent, and there is that framework that you just saw, we think that begins to get us closer to the necessary and sufficient for schools in Harlem to be as good as the schools in Scarsdale, and the schools in both places to be as good as the best schools in the world. The problem with that is we're talking about schools and systems in the kind of current paradigm of schooling. And we know what's happening around us in real time today are whole new approaches to personalized learning. We heard from Dr. Zhao just a few minutes ago that part of the new paradigm of schooling that you're envisioning is one that's personalized and global, right? So if we think about those not as performance curves, but as paradigm curves, right? We're at the place, we think, where not only are the systems represented in this room, not only have to continue to do serious work about moving from great to excellent, but a new paradigm is emerging in real time for which those systems are preparing their own transformative work. And our concern as an organization is that if we're not paying attention and working at the system level, there can be an awful lot of collateral damage as that transition occurs from one paradigm to another. And that the potential damage that gets done are to the students that are served least well in the current system. So if we think about avoiding that experience, we see a lot of collateral damage or loss of students least well served. Our bet here is that an R&D driven approach to innovation, especially with those systems that are serious about this transformation from one paradigm to another, is where the opportunity for improvement, the work exists for us going forward. We're going to do that through the network we're creating. We'll talk more about networking and networked approaches tomorrow afternoon. We'll talk a little bit about some of the policy issues and the leadership issues with what I've just laid out. But I'm way ahead of my schedule. I'm going to now give you a chance to turn to your tables, process what you just heard. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to ask Dr. Zhao and Dr. Hanyashek to come up with Jim, and we'll take questions together and before we break for lunch.